The Universal Engine name resonates with many of us as one of the best sailboat engines available. Our friend, full-bore diesel mechanic and practical sailor writer Meredith said she plans to work on many more Universal engines, including the one aboard her own boat. Her own Universal M Series diesel has over 8,000 hours on it, and it doesn't and probably won't ever skip a beat. Last month, you read about how Yanmar dominates the marine diesel engine market today, operating an excellent platform of engines built over the last 100 years. Yanmar offers marine engines large and small, and while they may be the big dog in the sailing world today, they weren't always. Universal Motor Corporation, originally headquartered in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, was at one time the largest producer of marine engines. The company began with the production of the both loved and hated gasoline Atomic 4. The Atomic 4 is actually a descendant of the Utility 4, which was built by Universal for the US Navy during World War II as a lifeboat engine. But at the end of the war, Universal needed a way to stay in the engine game, so they tapped. In 1947, the new design for the Atomic 4 was put into production for use as a sailboat auxiliary. If you've been around sailboats at all in the last 20 years, you likely know the Atomic 4. It's a simple flathead four-cylinder engine that's raw water cooled. During its production run from 1947 to 1984, approximately 40,000 of these little 18 horsepower engines were built, and today it's estimated about 20,000 of them are still in use. I see them in used boats we look at almost every day, despite the fact that they haven't made one in 40 years. Universal was riding on a cloud back then with its little gas engine, but something new was on the horizon that would threaten their domination of the sailboat game, and that something was diesel. In the early 1970s, Yanmar was becoming increasingly popular with its line of small diesel auxiliaries, forcing Universal to come up with a new game plan to compete. Diesel engines were becoming very popular due to their reliability, their ability to do very heavy work, and even more importantly perhaps, posing less risk of explosion from highly volatile gasoline fuel vapors. If Universal wanted to stay in the game, they needed to come up with a diesel to keep up with Yanmar, but they never made a diesel before. They knew what they were doing with gasoline. For decades, they've been perfecting it. They faced a choice: spend the millions in R&D to make a brand new diesel engine all their own, which would be a huge risk and kind of a bet the whole company kind of thing. Or they could change tacks again. In 1976, Universal switched gears to the diesel market and became what we now know as a marinizing company, as opposed to Yanmar, which builds complete engines with all Yanmar parts. Instead, Universal acquired Kubota tractor engine blocks and contracted with various other companies to build the marinized components, which together make up what we know today as Universal Diesel. Universal's Diesel M series are built to be simple, efficient, reliable, and easy to maintain. Kubota, a Japanese company that began business as a foundry, now builds engines for use in a variety of applications, specifically agricultural. However, they have more recently contracted to build and sell their engines to a variety of different companies for many different applications, including marine. Kubota saved the day for Universal back then by jumping in to provide an engine block that could fill the bill for Universal so that they could continue to compete in the recreational marine engine world. This master plan worked for a time, as Universal became Yanmar's direct competitor for the world's most popular engine in production sailboats like Catalina, Pearson, C&C, and more. Now, every engine and marinizing engine company has its flaws, and Universal has its own issues. As mentioned, Universal's earlier diesels were marinized to some degree. They were built from engines that were never really intended to be used in a marine environment. Universal would use automotive-grade components for things like starters and alternators, and cheaper materials when it comes to things like heat exchangers. Well, this is nice for finding aftermarket and cheap parts. It's not always a plus if you have to replace them every few years because they can't handle that damp and salty environment. Cheap parts, but cheap parts. Readily available, but readily replaceable. In 1990, Westerbeke purchased Universal, along with all the rights to their complete M-Series engine line, and immediately started changing things. Universal customers could no longer go to a Kubota dealer for parts, and since the newer engines are purpose-built by Kubota for Universal/Westerbeke, there is no aftermarket for anything built after the Westerbeke acquisition. This directs all purchasing for parts, new and old, to Westerbeke and Westerbeke only. Frustrated as a diesel mechanic, Meredith says, "Where I really saw the change was when Kubota dealers would no longer help me. When, for example, the price of a can of Universal Blue spray paint went to $96. They used to help. I just bought a can of genuine, high-quality Yanmar gray spray paint instead. Probably the best hard engine enamel I've ever used in a marine setting. And that can only cost me $17. Meredith goes on, "Don't get me wrong, Universal M-Series has a lot of great features I enjoy, both as a mechanic and an owner of a Universal M25. Kubota has been building engines for a long time, and they know what they're doing. Kubota engines are incredibly reliable and very resilient to neglect. While their older models aren't the most efficient compared to their newer peers, they do tend to keep up when it comes to wear and tear if they're properly maintained. As with any engine, internal premature wear and failure are usually the result of poor maintenance or operating errors. Still, the neglected engines I've seen are impressive in their ability to continue to run despite some serious damage. Since earlier Universals were built from Kubota's line of existing tractor engines, it means there is a healthy aftermarket for affordable, not marine-priced parts, including complete overhaul kits that make it possible for me to rebuild these engines for my customers instead of forcing them to buy a whole new engine because something small inside it failed. The Kubota engines used for this older small engine line are designed to be rebuildable, not disposable. Here are some examples. These engine blocks have removable dry cylinder liners that take the expense and difficulty of heavy cylinder machining out of the picture entirely, and that really helps folks who are in locations that may rely on being able to rebuild these engines without any crazy tools. The mechanical injectors and injection pump are common and identical in most of the M-Series line, and even in other Kubota engines, making replacement and rebuild pretty easy. And thanks to a remote heat exchanger, if it ever fails and that exact part isn't available, you have the ability to plummet a different model if you have to. The exhaust elbow of the Kubota block Universal is one of my favorites. It's nothing more than 1.25" NPT thread pipe you can build to fit your boat's engine space. A piece of 3/16 Sterry stainless pipe is affordable, and in a pinch you can rebuild it with parts from a local hardware store. The engine also has a lower compression ratio than its competitors, making glow plugs necessary, but as long as they're working well, the engine will start fairly easily every time. In an era where engines are considered disposable, this is a big deal for those of us who want to keep our little engines happy for years to come. If you find a Universal diesel from the purely Kubota days, the mid-1970s to 1989, it's super reliable, easy to rebuild, it takes abuse well, and uses a lot of off-the-shelf automotive parts that are really easy to find. But much of it wasn't intended for marine use, so you may be working on it a little bit more than you'd like to. If you find a post-Westerbeke takeover 1990 and up engine, you'll struggle in the aftermarket and you'll find yourself paying more for parts, including the paint, and you'll have to go right to Westerbeke most of the time. If you like this video, please take a second to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. It's all new. Also, leave a comment and let us know what else you would like Practical Sailor to cover in future episodes. I'll see you guys next week.